I'm excited to share the latest episode of Deal Sorcery, where we talk about all things deal sourcing. This time, we're diving into the future of sell-side M&A and the transformative role of technology in deal sourcing. I'm Matt Rooney, and together with my co-host Dan Herr, we are thrilled to have Ori Eldarov on the show today. Ori is the co-founder and CEO of OffDeal, which is transforming the small business M&A landscape by offering a hassle-free way for owners to sell their companies for the highest price to the best possible buyer. We'll explore how OffDeal leverages AI to revolutionize investment banking for small businesses. Whether you're in a deal sourcing role or running a business, or just interested in the intersection between tech and finance, there's something in here for you. This is Deal Sorcery. Ori, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, Ori, we've been really excited to have this conversation with you, man. Before we, kind of dive into OffDeal's mission and like what you guys are building and all that sort of stuff, can you maybe start us with the journey a little bit, right? Like we know you were in investment banking, doing a number of deals, did B school, all that sort of stuff before getting into OffDeal. But like what really inspired you to leave Wall Street, leave investment banking, jump out and kind of get into this space with OffDeal?
How early did we start? I will say that I was always an entrepreneurial person and always had little side hustles that I was interested in. And even in after college, I ended up owning an ATM, in a local barber shop and making some money on the side that way. And when I was in banking, I really enjoyed the job and I enjoyed working on deals, but I was always thinking, man, so much cooler being the person being advised than the advisor. I remember early on having ideas of, well, what business can I acquire that can run on autopilot? And this is long before I knew the term search fund or, roll up or anything like that. So I was very, curious about ownership as a way to make passive income. And so my first dip into the space was when I was looking to buy a business myself. And businesses I looked at range from laundromats to crematorium services and all over the place. I ultimately built a thesis around cooking oil collection businesses.
Cooking oil collection. Interesting.
Yes.
So like what commercial kitchens would use?
Yeah, exactly. I guess as a banker, I worked in the power and utilities and renewable energy group at RBC and was very close to all the different tax incentives and things you could do. And I got curious with, well, if you have cooking oil, you can actually use that as a byproduct for biofuel. And if you have enough of it, you can get tax credits. None of these mom and pop shops did that because they didn't have enough scale or the willingness to explore that avenue. So I thought, well, maybe I can start with one cooking oil collection business. And if it goes well, I can buy more and eventually, unlock that revenue stream. That was back in 2019, guys. I spent almost a year looking at businesses. I didn't know anything about proprietary deal sourcing or that was even a word. So I just went on BizBuySell and Google and started looking for business brokers who I thought were M&A guys just like me, and quickly realized that the way the world works in this lower end of the market is very different. I've ultimately come to submitting 3 LOIs for 3 different businesses and got outbid each time. And then I was deciding whether or not I have the 4th one in me. And then COVID happened and it wasn't the best time to be buying businesses that are so levered to commercial kitchens. I put pause on that, started looking in the mirror and thinking, okay, what is it that I want to do? And someone convinced me to try to apply to business school, which I thought was going to be a waste of time and money because people go to business school to get a job in finance, already work in finance. I wasn't sure. And ultimately said, okay, I'm going to apply to a couple of schools. And if I get into a good school, I'll do it. Somehow ended up getting into Harvard Business School in 2021 and just told myself I'm going to put the blinders on and just going to think of cool startup ideas and just see where I can add value. Little did I know there was going to be about 150 kids in my class desperately trying to acquire plumbing businesses and roofing businesses and landscaping businesses. And that's where I learned about this whole search fund world and independent sponsors and lower middle market private equity. And I was like, wow, this is animal spirits right now with what's going on. That's how I got interested in the space.
150, sorry, you said 150 of your colleagues or your classmates while you were in business school. Was that just in your cohort, or was that was that across?
I think the number is about 10% of the class end up pursuing search fund full time.
10% of Harvard Business School folks are pursuing search funds now.
Yeah. Well, at least they want to. How many of them do it independent versus traditional route? How many of them, try it for a few months and change direction? If you squint your eyes and look at my year specifically, we might say, oh, well, with interest rates so high, private equity wasn't hiring as much. So maybe there were some people that would have done private equity, but decided to do this. But it's certainly very attractive to people with past investing experience, because if you go to a school like Harvard or Stanford or Wharton, you can, find investors, even if you're doing an independent path. I mean, you need an equity gap, like to fill an equity gap, you're going to find people that will back you. So it's a pretty attractive option. If it works, you're going to be a millionaire within 5 years, and if it doesn't work, well, you have a past private equity career to lean on to get back into the field.
That's really interesting. So doing HBS, so take us from there, right? And getting deep into knowing and understanding this whole search fund world, and having all your classmates that were in it. How do we go from there to OffDeal?
It was a very convoluted and non-straight path, and I'm going to spare you and the listeners from every single detail. But I will say that it was the art of the pivot. And it started all in the summer of 2022 when I had a lot of free time. I was using my free time to learn new technologies, and I came across generative AI for the first time. That's before ChatGPT came out. So to just date it a little bit.
Sure.
And I got very interested in language models. And then a couple of months later, ChatGPT came out. And my first thought was, when I tried it on the first day it came out, I was like, this is going to change finance. This is insane. And my initial idea was, I was like, wait a second, this technology just came out. Nobody else is jumping at it. Tech is usually ahead of finance. I'm going to build a co-pilot for investment banking. And little did I know that it was the most obvious idea ever. And everyone's going to start doing that at the same time as me. But I actually went through the brain damage of talking to people at my old firm about it. And when I interviewed them about what their problems were, I realized that, they wanted transcription of calls, where Zoom offers that, but they use Cisco WebEx, right? They wanted version control of their financial models. Well, SharePoint does that, but they don't use it, right? So a lot of the low-hanging fruit problems that investment bankers faced on the technology side of things was not due to lack of technology, but it was due to just procurement things and bureaucracy within a large bank. And so I thought, I don't know if this is where I want to spend my energy. It seems like there's a lot of blockers in the way that would prevent something so innovative as AI quickly spreading. And so I quickly shifted my focus to private equity, which is another world that I knew really well. And when I started going through my network and speaking to private equity investors, the number one problem they mentioned was deal sourcing. It was really hard to find deals. I mean, you guys have a whole podcast about it. The initial idea that I had, I was like, wait, this is brilliant. There's all these boomer companies like Grata and SourceScrub and PitchBook that haven't really been upgraded in a long time. They have these legacy infrastructures that are very hard to rip out and replace. I'm going to build a better Grata, or better SourceScrub. We decided to go, me and my co-founder decided to go through Y Combinator and work on that idea. And initially we saw a lot of promise there. People are generally not very happy with those data vendors, and there seemed to be a lot of willingness to switch. So it seemed promising at the time. And the pitch was, hey, we're going to use the latest and greatest in artificial intelligence and all these different models to surface the right opportunities for the right thesis. However, as we started speaking more to people in the field, we realized that they are mercenaries. They don't have particular loyalty to PitchBook or Grata or SourceScrub. They just want to go to whatever other people are not using, which is why they were so receptive to a new startup entering, because it's like, oh, well, nobody else knows of this startup. I'm going to try it. And when we extrapolated that out a few years, we realized that the more people have access to that data set, the less valuable it becomes. The person that benefits the most is the first guy or gal that subscribes to our platform. And the person that, benefits the least is the 1,000th person. That's like an anti-network effect. And so we went to the drawing board and we thought, well, maybe there will be some easy wins today by getting some private equity guys and search fund guys onto the platform, but longer term, this will get competed out. And so we started thinking about, well, what else can we be doing? Because there's clearly something not working in the space. We tried buy-side origination. We thought, hey, there's all these buy-side advisors that are, roaming the streets.
In terms of like selling a service to buy side, or in terms of like building your own buy side?
No, as in, being a guy that works with private equity firm X to help them find add-ons for their platforms, right? I mean, it's still a ton of effort being put into that work stream. It actually did work pretty well from a technology perspective, and I'm sure we'll get into all of that later in the pod. But it was an aha moment for me when I spoke to these business owners and they said that they have already entertained deals or entertained buy-side interests in the past, and those deals failed, and now they're fatigued because they tried twice and both deals died at the altar, and they just didn't want to do it again. And that's where I thought, wait a second, if deal failure is the big hair on fire problem, and sellers have already tried doing this sort of sequentially by working with one buyer this year, another buyer this year, and they just can't get it over the line, maybe there's a much more interesting opportunity to actually offer the sell side services. And that's where that everything clicked. And we realized that there is a much bigger opportunity to being a sell side advisor. And that's where we decided to shift most of our effort. We still do work with some buyers, as you mentioned, but this more on an ad hoc basis. And the primary service that we offer now is sell side. The whole thesis behind OffDeal and why we ended up raising $5 million in capital from investors is that we said, if you look at M&A as a series of workflows, and each workflow is a series of tasks, there's a lot of tasks that are very manual, non-client facing, minutia that can be either run in parallel or automated. And if you actually look at which touch points involve a human and a relationship, those are the minority of where the time is spent. And so the big bet that we're making is, can we build a truly AI native firm that replaces a lot of that human labor that is hidden away from the perspective of a seller or perspective of a buyer with software?
The AI native investment bank of the future, right?
That's right.
Got a good ring to it. Just so I'm understanding, like that aha moment that took place that made you hone in on that idea. There's all these resources that go towards buyers and all the buy-side firms out there helping firms find those companies. But you saw an opening after speaking with companies themselves that had gone through processes that had failed to kind of be that platform or that resource for businesses themselves. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes. And maybe it's worth spending a little bit of time on who is actually reaching out to these owners today. For the most part, it will be private equity firms whose sole living depends on acquiring businesses, or they outsource that to buy-side advisors or buy-side brokers. Sell-side advisors don't do as much cold calling because if you look at the industry, most of them are 1 or 2 or 3 person shops. It is extremely fragmented. They live hand to mouth on commissions, and they just cannot invest into a scalable outbound sales motion. It's very resource intensive. And so you put yourself into the owner's shoes. Who is it that's going to be calling you? Where it's probably not going to be another SMB because they don't have a corp dev function. It's probably not going to be a sell side advisor because for the most part, they just do cold emails. They don't have the resources to do any meaningful cold outreach. And so who's left is the private equity firm and the buy-side advisors. And they offer a potential deal, keyword is potential, with one buyer. And that buyer is looking at 10 different deals. And at any given point, another deal can move faster. The other 9 hit pause, right? You might find something about the business that you don't like and you move away, right? So I don't need to tell you guys, the probability of any one deal happening is very little. And so from an owner's perspective, that's a pretty horrible user experience, right? And then if you look at the data for deals under $10 million of EBITDA, less than 20% go through a formal auction. Most deals occur through a direct sale. And you look at the multiples difference for the deals that go through an auction and those that don't, proprietary deals price lower, 15 to 20%, which makes sense. That's why people are trying to do proprietary deals, right? It's a better deal for them. It's not as good of a deal for the owner. Those are the things that clicked for us. And we said, wait a second, structurally, sell-side advisors in this part of the market don't really play, right? They're all local regional brokers. They might do some cold outbound. When they do cold outbound, they're doing that through a marketing agency that they found on Google. They are much more relationship driven, and a lot of their business is more referrals based. Whereas we can build a scalable engine and then truly build a national scale firm. We say internally that we're building the Goldman Sachs for small businesses. And then we truly mean that we want to build a company that serves all businesses across the United States.
That's an interesting stat. I want to just read that back to you, right? Which is that like 80% of transactions below 3 million in EBITDA are done without an advisor. Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, that's truly remarkable, right? But and to your point, like that is the whole reason that proprietary deal origination exists. There's the opportunity. And I think you told me the other day too, like when you flip that, right, and you look at the 3 to 5 million plus EBITDA sort of range, it's kind of like there's the break point, and now it becomes 80% plus banked at that point. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact break points, but if we peel back, right, a deal over $1 billion is going to be banked on both sides, right? 100% of deals over $1 billion get banked. Deals over $100 million of EBITDA, probably 98% are banked. Over $10 million of EBITDA will be like 85% banked. And so the lower into the markets you go, like the more premium mainstream lower middle market, the less deals are banked. And by the way, it totally makes sense, right? Like we just talked about the structural impediments from a origination perspective, and the resources private equity firms command are much higher than that of the sell side. But also the unit economics start to kind of fall apart, right? If you're charging 5% to 10% on a deal and your EV is just a few $1,000,000, I mean, then you have to take into consideration the probability of that deal happening and how many deals you can do at the same time. It makes sense that if you're a sell-side advisor worth your salt, you're looking at the middle market because you can do 2, 3 deals and you're making great money, probably sometimes more than some of these Wall Street people are making, right? And so that was the thesis hey, if we can largely streamline and automate a lot of this minutia that comes with deals, and at the risk of being too obvious and banal here, I'm talking about sending an NDA, and then you have to chase the owner to sign the NDA, and then you're waiting for the financials, and then you have to chase them to get the financials, and then you have to do a valuation, and then you have to send them the seller agreement, and then you have to chase them on that, and there's back and forth with a lawyer, and then you finally are working on bringing them to market, and how do you onboard them, and how do you build a data room fast, and you go to market, and how do you manage NDAs and due diligence questions, and you have 50 buyers in the process, they're all sending you a bunch of DDQ lists. How do you manage that? Like there is a reason why historically most advisors only could work on a couple of deals at a time. It's a lot of work.
It's interesting, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about like this opportunity that clearly exists in the lower end of the market. But the question to me is like, well, why isn't that just the space for, the marketplace concept to exist?
I think almost every single person who tried to build any sort of technology in the small business landscape has thought of the Zillow for SMBs.
Right. I mean, like you see this in real estate, right? Where it's like you got the Zillows and the Redfins of the world, and they like whatever, like just list my own business, list my own property, and you're talking about serving the long tail of the market. So like, why OffDeal versus like, the Redfin of M&A, right?
There's a couple of things you said there. So first, let's look at a marketplace, right? So Zillow is not a marketplace per se, right? Zillow is a listings website where real estate brokers do deals, right? And the revenue model for Zillow is the listing fees, and they're now expanding into mortgage origination and other things. But really, they're in real estate advertising business. Why is that? It's because selling a house or buying a house is one of the most emotional transactions you'll ever make. It's extremely complex. It requires a lot of feelings are involved, right? And negotiations. And we haven't figured out a way to delegate that to software alone. Now think about a business. You're not just living in a home. You're operating a business, waking up at 5 a.m. every day, opening up the gates and closing it down and dealing with, layoffs and hiring and everything for the last 30 years. You're not listing that on a website.
Well, I agree with you at a certain scale, right? But like if you look at, for instance, Andrew Gzdecki had his micro acquire, which is now acquire.com, right? And like they've done a bunch of just like list businesses on there, but it started, I think, really at the low end of the market, right? But they seem to have traction, and I don't know, it's like your sense is like there's not a place?
It's funny you mentioned Andrew. So first of all, I've met Andrew a few times. Great guy. I think is one of the pioneers in the space. I'll give you my outside in perspective on acquire.com. I think microacquire worked great because micro SaaS businesses are a lot more homogenous than, a $5 million or a $10 million business. And for
Sure.
any sort of marketplace to function well, you need liquidity. So if you take the most extreme example, the NASDAQ is very liquid because every apple of share is the same. And so there's no difference between one or the other. And it's perfect price discovery, right? If you look at something like business or even real estate, you have a lot more heterogeneity in both the supply, what is being sold, and the demand, what people are looking for. You have different revenue models, right? You have different customer concentrations. You have location as a huge limiting factor, right? Some businesses just cannot be operated remote, right? You have different business sizes. How owner dependent are they, right? So there's all these different vectors of differentiation. So if you look at 1,000 plumbing businesses, they're all sort of different. And that is an antithesis for liquidity. If we look at micro acquire, small SaaS businesses can be operated remotely. It's usually an app or a website. It's a lot more liquid of a marketplace because both the buyers and the sellers are a lot more similar. Now, he bought the acquire.com domain to expand away from micro deals into bigger deals. And if I'm not mistaken, what he had to do is he had to hire a lot of customer success people that are de facto in-house M&A advisors that guide owners through the process and can help them and figure out how to upload their financials or connect their QuickBooks or Stripe accounts and whatever else. So I think he built a fabulous business. And by the way, I think if there was a entrant into the regular non-software side of things, it would be Acquire because they built great brand. But the marketplace model is not what's going to get them there, is my prediction.
In a lot of ways, I don't disagree with you, right? Which is like, at least in my experience, when you're working with business owners, right? Like, especially once you get above a certain size, and to your point, like you've got a lot of, different moving cogs in your business day in and day out, right? It's like, I don't have the ability or the bandwidth to be able to run a full process, in-house internally with my entire team. And in fact, it's a huge distraction from my business, right? And being able to do it. And like, what would I really like as a business owner is like, I'd like somebody that gives me the white glove sort of support that allows me to get the best outcome for my business without me completely sacrificing the execution of my business and or the valuation on the outcome. My sense in general is like there's always going to be that place, even to the extent marketplaces exist and propagate through parts of the market. Like to me, there's always going to be this portion of it, which is like, if I've got a decent scale sort of business or I'm a, decent quality enough business, like I'm going to need somebody that's going to be that specialist and the person that's going to help me kind of get to the outcome that I want.
I agree with you there. I think, you've talked a lot about white glove service. I think you've missed another piece of it, which is, well, how are you going to find buyers? And if you are thinking of it as a pure marketplace model, your buyer universe is limited to the number of users that are looking for businesses for that specific type of business on your platform. And, building any network is very hard, especially something as heterogeneous as SMB M&A. Now, compare that to our approach. A big selling point for business owners for working with us is that we build software that allows us to identify every single potential buyer for their business, whether strategic or financial. And what we do is we reach out to those decision makers directly. They might not be actively looking for an acquisition. They might not know that your business is for sale. They might not be looking at, Axial or BizBuySell. But when an opportunity that is well curated presents themselves, they will take a look. And we're seeing that a lot with strategic buyers who are strategics. Others, SMBs that are, maybe 2-3 times larger than the target company. Growing organically is really hard, especially over the last 4 years. The economy has not been very forgiving. And when there is a great business in the exact same niche that you are comes for sale, people are going to take a serious look. Like you mentioned earlier, they don't have an M&A or corp dev team, right? They're not actively perusing these marketplaces. They're never going to know that your business is up for sale and could be a good opportunity for them if you don't reach out to them. And that's what we do. And that's what's not possible with the marketplace.
Doesn't that open up more of the kind of winner's dilemma piece of the equation, right? When you market and sell a business and it's presented to the potential strategic acquirers that are potentially competitive in some form or fashion. And now everybody that's in the market has kind of seen the book on that business. And then if you're the one that wins it, now all of your competitors know all the ins and outs of that business that you just acquired. If you're opening that up to a broader audience because you've better, like, it's like, I don't like making this argument, right? Because like on one side I'm saying like, I don't want to advocate for a worse outcome because like, I don't think that's the right answer. But like, to me, it feels like there's also this other trade-off, which is now because you guys are better at identifying all of the potential, acquirers, like what are the implications then for the eventual acquirer of this business?
Are owners preferring a strategic buyer or a financial buyer, or is there no difference? Based on my conversations, there is definitely some hesitation about information sharing with a strategic. If you're an advisor worth their salt, you will do some sort of phased or staged information sharing with a strategic, where maybe in the round 2 of the bidding or round 3 of the bidding, you will provide more of this confidential information around specific customer contracts and things, perhaps, post LOI. Now, in terms of the emotional aspect of it, a lot of owners I've spoken with say that they would prefer to sell to an insider.
Somebody inside their existing business?
No, someone in their niche, someone like a fellow operator, and not a private equity firm. And what's interesting is, you would think that the negative perception of private equity, if there is one amongst SMB owners, would be something around, they're going to fire my employees and they're going to, cut costs and all that stuff. Actually, the number one complaint I hear about private equity backed roll-ups is that, I've seen a couple of my competitors get bought out, and look at their Google reviews. Look at their customer service that they provide now. It's gone to shit.
So they're worried kind of about their legacy and like what the future of the business they've built, right?
Yes. The customer service, the customer experience that they provide, because in their view, if a private equity firm comes in, they're so focused on efficiency and profits that the reputation of their business will take a hit. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, some people say, whoever pays me the highest number, right? For sure.
Of course.
Right. But for a lot of these owners, they're very intrigued by the idea of selling to someone who understands their industry. And they find it fascinating that we can locate and engage those people discreetly.
I'm sure that's why a lot of PE firms are also kind of paying attention to which operators they can kind of advertise, when they're doing sourcing to these companies, right? Who they can partner with and whatnot. But maybe to shift gears here a little bit, we want to talk a lot about technology's role in all of this. So maybe just more specifically to OffDeal, can you walk us through how OffDeal uses AI, how you use it to identify potential buyers, sellers? Is that right? How you're using it?
We use it throughout the entire stack, and I'll break some of this down for you. If we take a step back, whenever it comes to deal origination, right, whether you're on the sell side or the buy side, your effort's going to be as good as your list. Who are you reaching out to? Like, that's the top of the funnel. So when we started building OffDeal, the first brick that we laid was a database of businesses. And as a former user of Grata and PitchBook and all these other things, I already knew what some of the limitations were. What we've done is we've assembled a data set based on publicly available and licensed data of 2 million businesses. Where does the number 2 come from? 2 million is roughly the number of companies in the United States that have more than $500,000 in revenue and less than $100 million in revenue. That is the sweet spot for us. And maybe if we're being honest, it's probably to the middle, low end of that range. But generally, that is what we see as our sandbox.
Sorry, above 500,000 and less than $1 million of revenue, or of, I thought you said revenue, right?
Revenue.
Yeah.
And by the way, right, if you quickly do the math, there's 33 million small businesses in the United States.
Right.
And so if only 2 million of them are within our sandbox, and then if you squint your eyes, maybe it's, even 1 million is the real number, once you take out the super small ones and super large ones, that means that roughly 1 out of 30 businesses are sellable in the lower middle market space.
And sorry, your assessment of like what a sellable business is. So so you said 500,000 to $1 million.
$100 million.
Sorry, to $100 million in revenue.
Yes.
Got it. That's why I was missing you, right?
Yeah.
So 500,000 to $100 million in revenue. there's roughly 2 million businesses, and you said maybe even closer to 1 million businesses out of the 33 million in the US that fall into that category of what you'd consider sellable businesses, or at least representable by an OffDeal of the world.
Yes. And of course, there's a lot more that goes into whether something is sellable, but that's like a quick proxy for that.
Of course.
And by the way, just as a quick jab at the data vendors, if you go on their websites, you'll see crazy numbers of like, oh, we have 300 million data points and 200 million. There's just not enough targets there, right? To have that data. So either you're including global data or duplicate data on multiple decision makers within a company.
That's what always surprises me, right? Because you see some of these and they'll say like, we have 100 million, companies in our database. And I'm like, where are you getting 100 million? Like it, especially for majority of private equity, given Europe is growing in its own way, but like the majority of the focus being US and Canada, right? Like to your point, 33, I think is it 33.5 million? That's the number I always use of like, small businesses in the US.
18 million of them are sole proprietorships. So, but anyway, so we started with building this data set, and that's the first place where we've extensively used large language models. We saw that the existing data vendors had very patchy data on companies, and probably the first line of attack is, okay, well, what does this business actually do, right? What do they sell? To whom? What is the business model? And the traditional methods usually, rely on industry codes on the worst end of the spectrum, and hopefully some keywords on the top end of the spectrum. But the keywords really, pre-large language model world, it's just you look at words that are most frequently used. Like there were scripts that you could run on a website.
It was a traditional like TF-IDF sort of thing, right? Where you just go and find like, here's the keywords that are different in this document versus others, right?
That's right. And so we thought, okay, well, if I had all the time in the world and I manually went on every single website, what are the 4 or 5 things I would be looking at on each company, right? And then we figured out how to build an AI agent that can replicate that work. And so when I say AI agent, what I mean is it's a piece of software that can reason qualitatively and analytically and review its own work. So for every company, we want to learn what are all the products and services that they offer, what are the end customers that they serve. We might look at things that like, is it a franchise? Is it woman-owned business? Is it a veteran-owned business? There's a few kind of checklist things that we want to review. And so our AI agent will physically navigate to the website, click around different pages, searching for that information. It will analyze whether or not that question was answered, and what by the time it's happy with the information that it got, it will move on to the next business. And we do that, 2 million times effectively. So that was the first huge unlock, right? When you can have this literally an analyst going through each company's website and meticulously cataloging everything that they do. There's a lot of engineering complexity that comes with that, but the end product is that we have this beautiful data set that has structured and semi-structured data on every single business that we care about. And then the second problem that immediately we identified after we had that data set is how do you surface the right companies out of that data set? You would think that search is a solved problem. We all use Google search. We all use Control F.
Yeah.
It is an absolute rabbit hole. And probably one of the technologically hardest things that we had to figure out is to build our own recommendation engines that can understand what we mean when we say home services, or what we mean when we say building services, or facility maintenance or something like that. And so that is the second time now we're using AI. Now, that's not using large language models. It's using something called embedding models. Effectively, what that allows us to do is use conceptual understanding of a search query and being able to surface the similar companies based on that search. So I don't have to list out every way you can say pest control to get a list of pest control companies.
And that's the beauty. And just for people that aren't familiar, right? Like what embeddings are and what the beauty of embeddings is like effectively taking, text or pieces of information. It doesn't necessarily have to be text, right? And then converting that into, a vectorized representation in a, matrix or array. And then functionally, you're able to then take that and compare that data versus other data and say, where is it similar to these other things? And so to your point, right? If you're looking for dog, you can still find it via dogs, puppies, other things that are kind of similar terms, to that, given it's all in the realm of the technology stack that's used for large language models and used for, what people think of as kind of AI today. But like it's that I just wanted to clarify for folks, like the understanding of like what embeddings are.
Yeah, maybe I can use one example. So if you were looking for industrial cleaning or power washing businesses using our system, we can just type in power washing, and it will also surface companies that do ice blasting and chemical cleaning and dry blasting and sand blasting and all these different things that are typically associated with that word. The challenge is, how do you calibrate that system that it shows you just the right amount of similar companies? And by the way, you're not just looking for products and services, you're also looking for end markets that they serve, right? Because maybe you're particularly interested in commercial janitorial services and not the ones that, go to your house. Oh, and by the way, there's also some relational filters that you need to apply, which is looking at states, revenue size, or employee range. So there's a lot of technical complexity that comes with that. And I am confident that what we have built is the state of the art compared to anything else on the market today. But like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we don't have any intention of licensing that out, because no matter how advanced the system is, when everyone has access to it, it might as well not be advanced at all. And maybe if I could quickly add one detail that is particularly interesting on a deal sourcing side of things.
Sure.
I think the private equity market grossly misunderstands how many companies are there for any given roll-up opportunity. Because we've spent some time doing buy-side origination, we speak to these investors and they say, I think there's going to be 10,000 potential targets for this platform that we have. Because our system works really well and the way it intends to, we can find pretty much the closest approximation to the actual number. And that number is oftentimes in the hundreds, not in the thousands. That's when you apply the size filters and the product mix and the, exclude everything you don't want. Say you're looking for add-on opportunities in the mental health space, and you want those that offer nasal ketamine and TMS, but then you specifically don't want those that have less than 5 nurses and offer talk therapy. Well, by the time you apply all these filters, you're only looking at 500 to 1,000 companies, depending on the industry. And there was a big disconnect between what investors we talked to expected their investable universe to be versus what it actually is. And then when you think about, okay, well, what % of those businesses are up for sale, and then of those, what % is sellable when you actually get into the books, it's actually quite hard to find 8 or 10 add-ons.
Is that across industries, right? Like you find the generic, like a couple hundred versus couple thousand. I don't care if you're talking about HVAC, sort of roll up, or whether you're talking about, dentistry offices, or you're talking about, manufacturing. Like, I don't know. Does that number apply across industries?
I think there are definitely some industries that are more generic, where there's less heterogeneity within that industry, plumbing being one of them. There's probably 10,000 plumbing businesses that you can find, and then size and makeup is more of a factor here for, like, is it a sellable business? But manufacturing is a fantastic example, where you think there's so many manufacturing businesses. Well, they all manufacture different things, right? So if you use a traditional database, and you look at the total number, it shows you, it's like, there's 12,000 manufacturing businesses. Great. You go to page 2 or 3 of that search result, and you're not looking at anything that's accurate, right? So it really depends on how specialized your thesis is, and how many criteria you personally have. I would say it's an order of magnitude less than what people expect on average.
That's how the identification piece, how you're using AI on targeting the right companies. I think you kind of started with the data set that you built, and then kind of went into the identification piece. Can you go further? Is there any other kind of primary way to utilize it?
Right. So if you think about, again, how do I know which of these owners I should reach out to? There's probably some intent signals that you can look at. I don't want to get into this exact specifics of what we use to point the spear in the right direction. But, some of the obvious ones are, business owner age. Is their wife retired? Are their kids out of college? Did they move houses from where the business is located recently? Do they own multiple businesses? There's ways you can stitch together interesting data to get a better understanding of how high of a propensity seller it might be. All of that is done with software as well. The next piece of it is our internal operations. So by the time any sort of outbound attempt is done, every single lead is pretty well researched, and that's done with AI agents that we talked about. So our, BDRs will get a custom call script. They will be calling people that we have a pretty good idea of that this business is sellable, that there could be a high propensity seller. So everything that could go right, we already try to tip it in our favor. So you had a call. Great. The person wants to meet. Well, what happens next? Well, there's a series of admin things you have to do, right? You have to put it on the calendar. You have to put it into CRM. You have to, update the status. You have to, make sure that the reminders and notifications are sent. And because these people don't use Calendly and they don't use, Zoom, and they use phones. And, so all of that has been automated. We've basically eliminated the need for any virtual assistants or support staff. All of that has been done by what we call AI managers, effectively, that just oversee all activity, outbound and inbound, that goes in between OffDeal and any business owner, and then it helps us decide the best course of action. And so that's a completely separate agentic system built completely separately from the first research agents that we talked about, that handles over administrative tasks. And that extends to onboarding as well, NDAs and receiving financials and all that kind of stuff, sending chasers, all of that stuff's been automated as well. Then on the actual M&A execution side of things, it's very important for the advisor to be there with the owner to support them through the process, explain how it all works. But after that is done, there's still a lot of minutia, putting together SIMs and teasers and buyer lists and preparing, for the most, likely questions that will be asked. All of that has been automated with separate set of AI agents as well. And, even stuff like preliminary evaluation. When it comes to deal management, NDAs, everyone's worst nightmare, right? NDAs flying around. We've built a platform that allows buyers to do everything in-app. They don't need to go into DocuSign or anything like that. We've integrated everything inside the OffDeal platform. So it's a very streamlined experience. The data room is right there. You don't need a separate, Intralinks or Merrill or whatever. So we've tried to just remove as much friction from the process as possible.
It's amazing, man. I mean, as you're walking through all this stuff, you guys have built a substantial technology stack.
Yes. And we've built, we use very little third-party software. One of the other ways we use AI that is perhaps less obvious to the listeners is it actually helps you code faster, right? Like our software engineers use AI to build AI. The amount of stuff that we can build in-house in days, not weeks, is just phenomenal. And I was talking to my co-founder the other day, and I didn't even mention, but he's a good friend of mine, and he was a software engineer at Meta, worked on their recommendation engines, things like that. So he's very familiar with the kind of stuff that we're building. And he said that what we have right now is more sophisticated than most enterprise Salesforce implementations, because everything has been custom built with all the automations streamlined and optimized specifically for this space. And he said no broker would afford a Salesforce implementation, right? It's like tens of thousands of dollars. And most private equity firms, in the lower middle market probably don't even have that, right? They probably use HubSpot or, Pipedrive or one of those more, deal specific CRMs. They're not optimized for this type of stack. And I realized that he's right. In the old days, we probably would have had to go through a major CRM provider and then have their guys come into our workplace and basically build all these things from scratch. But now we don't have to. We can build it ourselves.
Why not just license this to the investment banks out there?
Because I can make a lot more money by doing, charging a 5% fee on the sell side than I ever would by selling a piece of software. I also do think, you briefly asked me about my mission or vision earlier on. I do think that this space needs a more seller-friendly M&A firm. I think a lot of the incentives in the space are totally off when people charge large upfront fees, and that's actually the main driver of their P&L, not the success fees. I don't want to name any of my competitors, but there are certainly some companies you've heard of that literally will take on any business, even if they think it's unsellable, because they'll clip a $25,000, $50,000 upfront fee, and the owner kind of feels stuck. And then if it sells, it sells. It's like upside value for them. But then you just churn through these unsellable businesses and charging them commitment fees to, make up for all the failed deals. I hate that. So I do think there needs to be a more seller-friendly alternative to these owners. And if you look at the larger kind of Wall Street banks, they operate on success fees, right? When I worked at RBC, we didn't charge commitment fees.
So I guess I didn't appreciate that, right? So like for OffDeal, you guys aren't charging any upfront fee. It's only success fee.
There is a small nuisance fee that we charge and just for the owner to have a skin in the game, but it's a rounding error. Not one person has complained about it. It's literally a paper cut just to have some skin in the game in the process while we're on it.
But it's not the 250 to 750K sort of,
No.
sell side mandate sort of fee that I feel like most folks charge, right?
No, it's at the tune of a few $100 a month.
Yeah.
It's an annoying fee to pay. Certainly, if you're not serious about selling, it's a very annoying fee to pay. But we tell people, look, we're going to align ourselves with the success of this transaction. And by the way, that means that we're very selective with who we bring on. I'd say 3/4 of the business owners I speak to, I recommend them not to sell today.
Yeah.
And I think they appreciate that, by the way. Everyone else is telling them to sell today.
So it's all of this, again, like really compelling, really interesting value prop that you guys have put together, both in the way of saying, like, to your point, being more seller friendly, as well as like leveraging AI to be more effective, efficient, and value additive for every potential seller. One of the things you and I have talked about the other day a little bit, and I wanted to just dive into for a moment, like all of this brings to mind, I think what's front of mind for a lot of folks in our industry today, which is like, what is the role of humans and what is the role of machines in this future of M&A, right? And I think there's probably an answer, which is like, okay, what are the role of humans and AI today for where OffDeal is? But like, I don't know, it to me kind of opens up this broader picture of what does that whole future look like as well. So I don't know, I'd love to dive into both of those, like what for you guys, what's human and AI today, and then like where do you see it going?
It's a fascinating question because I think it will mean different things to different people within the ecosystem. I think for service providers of any kind, whether you are an M&A advisor or an accountant or a law professional, it is a great augmenter of your services. Now, does that make you more competitive or less competitive? I mean, I think depends on what everyone else is doing, but overall, I genuinely believe it will help you provide a better service to your clients, right? The fact that we can turn around evaluation within 24 hours and it's a beautiful, well-formatted report that is easy to understand, that's just better customer service. So I think as a service provider, you're supercharged and you can probably focus more on the relationship building side of things and strategic advice and less on the minutia of it all. And I can think of a stronger case for that within the M&A landscape. I think if you're a buyer, it perhaps increases your batting average when you're doing proprietary deal origination, if you know how to leverage technology correctly, right? Again, I use the terminology of pointing the spear in the right direction. Do you have to talk to 100 owners before you find an interesting opportunity, or 10, right? Where in that range do you fall? I think the owners one is the most interesting one because it's so multifaceted. I will say at first that in my conversations, and I speak to about 50-ish owners a week right now, nobody cares about AI. They've heard of it. One person actually said they tried to look me up on ChatGPT, which was very cute because I'm definitely not on ChatGPT yet because the model was trained in October 2023. But other than that, they really don't care. Like when we talk about what we do, they really are focused on outcomes, not how you get there, to a point where sometimes I don't even mention, right? Only when they say, well, how are you going to find buyers and yada, yada. Where I think AI has the greatest potential is providing a 24/7 available confidant or a support person to the owner. And it will totally depend on their willingness to adopt that technology. I'll give you an example. You are on a Saturday afternoon looking at the LOI that you received from a buyer. You as an owner, are you comfortable asking ChatGPT or some platform, right, that uses AI to take a first pass at this LOI and explain some term that you don't understand? Or do you have to wait until Monday morning and call your lawyer and incur those costs? if you have a question about valuation, is there a 1-800 line that you can call where an AI agent will answer and confidentially will take in information about your business and do the analysis in real time and provide you with a rough valuation range and answer follow-up questions. AI could be an incredible tool for education for business owners. And what I don't know yet is how long it will take for them to take advantage of these tools that are already available today for free, right? You can go on ChatGPT and ask those questions. I don't think too many business owners do today. For OffDeal, we try to deliver these experiences to owners in a most digestible way, where we abstract away all the AI part of it and just deliver them the answer. So if you go on our website today, offdeal.io, there's a tool that we provide to owners where they can put in their company's website, and within 30 seconds, we'll show you what financial buyers would be interested in their business. Now, behind the scenes, multiple things happen. Our AI agent goes on their website and learns about their company. I just talked about that earlier in the conversation. And our separate AI system goes through tens of thousands of past private equity deals and tries to match this company with relevant investors. All of that is hidden away from the owner. All they see is I put in my website and I get back a list of names. We're trying to bridge that gap with these digestible tools that use AI to deliver an answer. But I think longer term, owners will rely on AI just as much as young people ask ChatGPT things today.
How do you see the rest of the market today in their use of the same type of technology? And I guess, how do you see it moving forward? Do you think that private equity firms themselves will start putting resources into similar types of software and have agents that are helping them refine lists and facilitate outreach? Where do you see it going?
I think on a long enough time horizon, yes. I think everyone is going to be using these technologies. The $1 million question is how long is it going to take them? It is very complicated engineering work today. Like, it is really hard, and not just any developer can do this. Not every software engineer can do this. And it requires a lot of iteration, a lot of back and forth. And if it's not immediately driving your P&L, I don't know how much internal buy-in these organizations will get to dedicate any meaningful resources to that. The cynic in me will also say that the top engineering talent does not want to work at a private equity firm. The top engineering talent, if they want to sell their soul, they work at hedge funds where they make over $1 million a year, right? They go to Jane Street or Citadel or Two Sigma, and they crush it there. Private equity historically has not been the paragon of innovation. And I think the only company that I can think of that actually built anything interesting in-house is probably Blackstone and maybe KKR, just based on my conversations with their technology teams. So maybe the biggest guys will build something in-house, and they have the brands to attract the talent and the long enough time horizon to spend the resources on that. But will a lower middle market firm with a few $100 million AUM do this on their own? I don't think so. I think a different question is, who will come, right? Like what competitors or other alternatives will come? I think that Grata and SourceScrub and PitchBook are on a clock right now to deploy these technologies, which I now, having gone through this myself, I now understand how hard it is, both from an eng perspective to gut out your system, because it's a fundamentally different system of record, but also from a psychological perspective. You have 20 employees that have put in blood, sweat, and tears into whatever you have now, millions of lines of code. And now you have to tell them, hey, we're deleting all of that and we're rewriting it from scratch. And by the way, it's not going to drive any more revenue. It's just going to keep us competitive. Like, that's a harder pitch internally. That's, by the way, the only chance startups have is that force that I just told you blocks incumbents from adopting new technologies. I know in Y Combinator and other VC-backed companies, there are startups that are trying to eat away at the space. And I think there's definitely a room for a better Grata or a better PitchBook. Then what about service providers? Well, we just talked about how brokers don't have the resources to even do, proper outbound sales themselves, let alone building software. And then the larger guys, I told you, they still use Cisco WebEx. So how long will it take them to go down market? And as the juice worth the squeeze. So I really do think that this is a white space right now. I think there's a ton of opportunity for entrepreneurs to come in and build a software solution for private equity firms. I've always been critical of AI for PE because most of them don't drive revenue and costs are not really an issue in private equity. I think deal origination is an example where it does directly translate into revenue and where there is an opportunity for entrepreneurs to build. I think on the sell side, the business model that I chose is the superior one. Obviously, I'm talking my own book, but I think selling a service for 5% of the transaction value in a space where $5 to $10 trillion of small businesses will change hands in the next 10 years is a pretty good place to be. And it comes to your, comes down to your ability to attract the right talent and the vision to just keep going when everyone is telling you that it's not going to work. But I do think that this will be solved. And by the way, in Japan, which is 5 years ahead of us in aging demographic, there is an AI-powered investment bank called Masuken that is a publicly traded company now. It's worth a few $1 billion. And it was only started in 2018 before large language models. They use some other technologies. And so they're a multi-billion-dollar business and they just absolutely crushed competition and they deliver great outcomes for business owners in Japan who are in their late 70s, early 80s now. I don't see any structural reason for a bigger version of that not to exist in the United States.
This has been a great discussion. I think there's a lot of insights here for our listeners and people who are in and around deal sourcing. So, Ori, can't thank you enough for spending time with us. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much, guys. And for those listening, if you're interested in joining OffDeal, we're growing really fast and hiring across a number of roles. Do check us out online.
And what's the website for them?
It's offdeal.io, but if you Google OffDeal, we're the first link.
All right. Sounds good.